So why are we here? We're here to learn about, what was it Rick said about how to be smarter, right? Not necessarily how to farm. But maybe because somebody paved the way for us, right? How many of you guys are generational farmers? Any of you guys in here not farmers? 1, 6, 8? Anybody want to be a farmer that's not a farmer? Anybody that doesn't want to be a farmer that is a farmer? Because someone's following behind it. Depends on the day, exactly. Because somebody's following behind us, or because we really love it, right? Or maybe we're just addicted to it. So, because somebody paved the way for me, this is James H. Baxter, Jr. So he gets credit for our farm, even though, you telling me that that feedback isn't too obnoxious for everybody else? I need to stop moving around. Okay, so that's my grandfather. In the picture on the bottom left, he was 93 in that picture. So that's him with a Minneapolis Moline uni harvester, and we still pick corn with that, by the way. That's how we pick our 1,200 acres of corn every year. No, I'm kidding. But he started selling Minneapolis Moline tractors in the 1950s in little old Georgetown, Delaware, and that kind of got us on the map. This is after he got done riding across Europe on a Jeep, defeating all of those people that were coming after our freedoms. And so we have a really strong heritage in regards to that. My great-grandfather moved to Georgetown, Delaware from Baltimore, Maryland, and actually he moved back home to where the rest of his family was, but he moved back to our exact area in what we call Stokely and started a tomato cannery. And so Jimmy and Bill, that's my father and my uncle. So my father's the one on the picture driving that's a Minneapolis Moline 602. And my Uncle Bill, the one that's dumping Lorax in a planter with no gloves and no glasses. And it's ironic. I mean, I can joke about it, but it's ironic now that I think about it out loud. My Uncle Bill died of a brain tumor. So you want to talk about health, right? Rick talked about taking care of yourself. That's really near and dear to me. My father died at 52 years old. My uncle died at 53 years old. They were 2 years apart in age. You guys got to take care of yourselves. Because of that. That's James the Fifth, Jude and Pearl, Justice and Jordan. And they're standing in some of that, what we call the Delaware Inland Bays. We call that the Ropewick Bay. This is where we go to recreate. I grew up on that water. And so that's just another picture of how cool my kids are. The verse on that door of that shop says, whoever works his land will have plenty of food, but whoever follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Came out of one of the best books, actually the best book ever written, right? The book of Proverbs, verse 12, 11. There's a long story behind that, but that sign, that sticker was put up on that door as a tribute to my grandfather and to remind me every time I pulled in that yard how I'm supposed to work and what I'm supposed to do and why I'm supposed to do it. Now, it's ironic that here we are talking about no-till, and it says whoever works his land, but we can kind of poke fun at that figure of speech. And so that's an 8-year-old, excuse me, not an 8-year-old, it's a 10-year-old. And what it's saying is, he's planting soybeans. There's my 13-year-old. He's over there planting soybeans. And, what have I got left to do? Well, I guess I'll go work on irrigations. Again, now we're talking about irrigations. So I started to tell you about my phone not being on vibrate because I got 36 center pivots. And all of them are supposed to be running back home. And I've got like 4 of them broke down. And I've left my sister there and my right-hand man. Actually, my sister's my right-hand man. This guy's my left-hand man, I guess. But so I stepped out a couple times because we had a conversation. I had one person standing at the pivot, the other person standing on the corner system. And they were controlling the machine while I was telling them what to do while I'm out here in Iowa. So come summertime in Delaware, we're 10 days from a drought. Lauren, you had 2¼ inches of rain about 2 weeks ago, and these crops look amazing. Hurricane Elsa came up the coast and busted us right good and hard with 2¼ inches of rain on Thursday night. By the following Friday, so within 7 days, I'm running pivots again. That's what we're working with. And we're combating that. So here's a little bit of Sussex County, Delaware. And so here's the inland bays right here that I was talking about, and they go all the way up, and right about here is where it turns from freshwater to saltwater, freshwater to saltwater. So all of this area around here is all saltwater, and there's a considerable amount of farming that's going on all down in this area, and it's some of the most productive ground we've got. Black ground, but it's kind of like black sand compared to you guys got like 18 feet of buffalo crap. We've got like 8 inches of black sand, and then it changes color and it's like gray sand or white sand, or you've got silt loam and sandy loams, and we got sandy sand. So there's a home farm about, that picture was taken probably 20 years ago. So those long buildings, any ideas what those are? Chicken houses. We don't call them chicken barns, all right? So if you ever come to Delmarva, we call it Delmarva Peninsula. If you ever come to Delmarva, they're chicken houses. They're not chicken barns. You sound like you got some intelligence. They're chicken houses. So when I got out of college in 2001, we had 15 chicken houses. That's just half of them. That's 7 of them. They're across the road this way. There's another 8 of them. So we had 450,000 chickens in production. So jump ahead to 2021, we've got 8 chicken houses in production. We've taken all of those, actually most of those have been burned down, and it's all cornfield. Actually a soybean field this year. The reason this is so important to us is because the poultry industry on Delmarva is what drives agriculture on Delmarva. We are the #1 producer of broiler chickens in the country. I can't begin to tell you how many actual chickens are grown, but I mean, for one farming operation in 2001 to grow 450,000 chickens at a time, and that's rotated between 5 and 7 flocks a year. So, I mean, it's just turning out chicken breasts, turning out chicken legs. So, what do the chickens eat? Corn. What do y'all grow? Corn. So thanks for your corn. So we're in a corn deficit in Delaware. Your corn gets put on a rail car and goes all the way across the country to Delaware. There's about 6 feed mills within 15 miles of us. So we got it a little bit easier than you guys do in that regard. Some of you guys haul, what, 1-2 loads a day to a feed mill or to wherever it is you sell your grain. I mean, I can be to a feed mill in 10 minutes, depending on traffic. And we don't go anywhere on Friday or Monday now. Everybody comes to our area because of the beaches. And they drive through our farmland to get to the beaches. And then they move here because the land's cheap and the taxes are cheap. And then they start complaining about the stink and the dust and the whatever and the, and the equipment driving slow down the 2-lane roads and et cetera, et cetera. So we have a struggle, to say the least, that we are trying to work through. But we're going to talk about one struggle at a time, and you guys didn't come here to hear me complain about what farming is like on the East Coast. We came to talk about soil health, I think. Isn't that right? Soil health, no-till, cover crops. So why in the world is there a bunch of people holding up underpants in fields? So it's been talked about this morning, and I think some questions were asked about nutrient management, right? And so because of said chickens, we have had major nutrient management issues. I don't know, I'm sure you all have heard about how the farmers of Delmarva are destroying the Chesapeake Bay, right? You guys have heard of the Chesapeake Bay, right? And you've heard about all the leaps and bounds that we have gone through in nutrient management to control runoff that goes into the Chesapeake Bay, right? So not only with the Chesapeake Bay, if I can go back, all right, so split the state in half, or the county, split the county in half, right about here. So there's Georgetown, there's our farm right there. So you kind of split it here and it goes off this way. Everything to the left goes to Chesapeake Bay. Everything to the right, to the south and to the right goes to the inland bays. Everything to the north and the right goes to the Delaware Bay. So we are under huge scrutiny by everyone because of our nutrients that we're putting on our farmland that goes into the bay. Who was talking about being a minority and being a majority earlier in a couple questions? Okay, so we're a minority. If you think that you ever be a majority, you're wrong. You're a minority, you always will be a minority. But, you guys have got to stick together, all right? You can't fight with a guy sitting next to you. You can't fight with a guy over here. You can't fight with a guy back there, right? You can't have an organic guy claiming that the conventional guy is a bad farmer in public, right? You can't have the conventional guy saying that the Ricks of the world are crazy. I think Rick's crazy. I think Rick's crazy, but I got goosebumps watching Rick. I can't wait. We're going there. I never met the man until yesterday, but some of the stuff he's doing is mind-blowing, right? So we're all crazy, right? Are we all crazy? We're all doing something trying to feed a world, and the whole entire world thinks we're trying to kill them. We're crazy. And we're going broke in the meantime. So some of what he says is what we're going to talk about also about not going broke. But I find it really hard to stay on task sometimes, so I'm sorry. Back to nutrient management. So we've made major leaps and bounds in our state. Delaware was the first state to have a nutrient management program, the state of Delaware. Open up the newspaper in, now I got picked on last night because of the name of the lab on my book, but sorry, it is what it is. I got these books go all the way back to 1986. We've been having analytical work done on our farm since 1986, every single farm, every single year. Since the early 90s, that analytical work has caused them to make recommendations to us to first off save money, second off save the environment. So I almost gave you guys a finger. I didn't mean to do that. But here I am, junior, senior in high school, summertime, open up the newspaper, which I didn't know how to read until I got junior, senior high school. But open up the newspaper, actually you didn't have to open it up because on the front page was the picture of that farm that I just showed you guys. 15 chicken houses on the front page of the newspaper because there had been a fish kill in the Delaware inland bays. Fish floating everywhere. And this was right after it happened in the Pocomoke River, which is a tributary into the Chesapeake Bay. So now we've got a target on our back. Uh-oh, what are we going to do with ourselves? Guys, it's coming, right? It's talked, right? It's talked that you guys are going to end up, and I'm saying you guys, the farmers of this area, are going to pollute so bad that they're going to shut down the water, the drinking water in these cities, right? And so that's what happened to us. We were killing fish. I'll argue and say we weren't killing fish, but it was high time we clean up our act and we start advertising for it. So we started doing this nutrient management program. What I can encourage to you all on the Cliff Notes version of that, do it yourselves. If you start regulating yourselves and you create a coalition of farmers and handpick a certain few government officials and handpick a couple real good scientists that have a real good head on their shoulders, some people from NRCS maybe, you guys start to regulate yourselves and you come up with some rules. That book is not public property. That book belongs at my farm. The only time that book is shown to the public, is shown to the government, is when I screw up. Other than that, that book is mine. In other states, that book is on public record, public archive. All right, we have one of the best nutrient managements in the entire country. The EPA has tried to come down on us, and we fought them back with a big stick because it's working. They have used us as a poster child. We've had the EPA on our farm talking about spread the manure. You know, it's coming. It's coming. You guys are the minority. And the reason I say that you're the minority because you have a very small voice when it comes to how people get voted for. Now, I understand in a big state like Iowa that you guys have a lot bigger voice than we do in little old Georgetown, Delaware, or the little old state of Delaware, because as you can imagine, if you pay attention to politics, that northern part that I talk about that's right above the canal, that sets the precedent on how the entire state operates, because that's where the population is. You guys understand that. That's where the population centers are. They're taking your vote. So you've got to stick together and be one voice. That was 20-some years ago. That was a whole generation ago that we've got nutrient management in place in our state. So those of you that are listening, pay attention to that. It's coming. It's coming. Because if you guys don't do it, the EPA is going to come and do it to you, and they're not cool. They're not cool. So how in the world did these people end up with underpants is kind of where we are. So that guy right there is a reporter from Philadelphia. That guy right there, that's a news crew from Toledo, Ohio. You guys remember a couple years ago when Toledo, Ohio had to shut all their drinking water down because what was happening, everybody's putting on anhydrous in the middle of the wintertime or fall, you know, and then it snows because it never snows. We don't have snow. It's too warm. If it snows this deep and the whole state shuts down. Otherwise, it rains. But it snows in Ohio. It snows here. I know it snows here because it gets stupid cold here. But it snows, and then it snows on top of that, and it snows on top of that, and it snows on top of that, right? You guys end up with snow up here. And then when the snow melts, it starts to go through the soil, and it takes anhydrous with it, and it goes in those nice little tile lines you guys have. We don't have tile lines. We got ditches. So you guys have subsurface drainage. We've got surface drainage because our water table's so close to the top that if, you know, it's just the way it works. But it goes in those tile lines, and it goes to the tributaries. It kills all the little itty-bitty fishes, right? And then it goes on down, and it gets in the rivers, and it does bad things to the rivers, and then it goes to the Great Lakes, or in this case, it goes south, and it, you know, it messes up people's drinking water. And whose fault is it? Yours. It doesn't matter whether you did the right thing farming. If he did the bad thing farming, you're a bad farmer, right? It doesn't matter whether you did the right thing farming. If that guy over there did the bad thing farming, you're a bad farmer. You're all together. And you can't start calling each other out in public because then you all look bad. You guys had to figure out how to set these rules in place for yourselves and self-regulate. You got to get the right people in place in the right places that have the ability to talk to people and say, this is why we do this and here's why we can't. You've had some great speakers the last couple of days, and there's a lot more to come that are going to talk about the things you do and why you do them. And you guys are all here because you want to do the right thing, and this is awesome. There's thousands more that ought to fill this place up because of what the EPA is going to bring you. So, Captain Underpants. Anybody got kids? Read Captain Underpants books or see the shows? So there's Captain Underpants. That's my son, James. This guy is a news reporter out of Philadelphia who actually, as a matter of fact, his full-time job, he's a school teacher. But he's on some morning show in the summertime, and so he came down. They got this news article that we were burying underpants on our farm to do a Soil Your Undies challenge. You guys heard of that? You take underwear and you go put them out in the field. Why underwear? Why underwear, not a T-shirt? Well, T-shirts are cotton. T-shirts aren't funny, man. Underwear's funny. That's why we buried underwear. So we go out in the field and we buried underwear. And about a month later, that's my buddy Timmy. That's Timmy's Underpants. He's my best friend. He doesn't farm like I do. But he's still my best friend. And I knew that they had we had a major flood. The flood you guys had in 2019 where everything was underwater. Is that right? Was it 19? 19? We had that in 18. Like 9 inches of rain in 45 minutes rain. So flooded out this guy's watermelon field. If you can imagine, watermelons, it's like $10,000 an acre input costs. Gone. Anyway, he tilled it all up because he had black plastic out there to go to watermelons in. He tilled it all up to plant soybeans because this picture was taken probably the 15th of July. Last ditch effort was to plant soybeans in it. So I knew he had pulverized his ground, and this was our check. So I buried Timmy's underwear in Timmy's field. I actually didn't go to his house and steal it. It's brand new underwear, but I took a Sharpie and wrote his name on it. That's Jamie Arthur. I said, Jamie, I said, look under there. He's like, what? Look under there. He goes, underwear. And so it does work. It does work. You stick your underwear in the ground on one piece, you've been doing a lot of soil health things, and you stick it on another piece that's, doesn't have the same whatever you've been doing, you pull one up and there's nothing left except the rubber waistband. The other one, it's still pretty much intact. You can look it up. Look up the Delaware Soil Your Undies Challenge. Sometimes I mispronounce the word soil. Soil, S-O-I-L. So it looks like my slideshow is taking us right on, and you're like, what in the world have we got going on here? So I guess I need to tell you, besides chickens, we grow corn and soybeans, and we grow lima beans, baby lima beans for processing. They get frozen, and we grow sweet corn. And you're probably wondering, what in the world? First off, how many of y'all are blown away that we're farming in Delaware? Right? You kind of, what in the world is this guy talking about? You probably think like, yeah, he's got like an oversized garden. Right? He's got a pea patch or something out back. So I'll throw some numbers at you because I don't like talking numbers, but for the sake of we're all friends here, I got 1,100 acres of field corn in. I've got 200 acres of sweet corn in. I got 200 acres of lima beans in. And I got another 800 acres of soybeans in. Besides that, my wife and I grow 9 greenhouses worth of flowers. So we stay busy. And so this is a slide that I took from other presentations that I've done. But anybody remember a Ropewick? So that machine has not run in 25 years. I think it was 15 the last time I ran a Ropewick. But we brought it out because, well, we had a weed problem, right? And we can't do anything about it because they're lima beans. So I can't go out there and spray Roundup, right? Anybody got Palmer amaranth? Good, good. I'll make sure I check my pockets that I didn't leave any here. So we get credit, we, the state of Delaware, get credit, the University of Delaware gets credit for identifying Roundup-resistant weeds. The first Roundup-resistant mare's tail was created in the state of Delaware. And it was identified pretty early on for Palmer amaranth. And that's because we've been no-tilling for so long because of the bay, but we were doing it by a lot of the wrong practices, right? We weren't doing a lot of these 6 practices over here. We weren't diversifying and we weren't armoring. We were just going out there spraying Roundup, planting soybeans in the wheat stubble. Come back next year, we'd go out there and plant corn, we'd spray Roundup over it. I mean, we just, we annihilated everything with Roundup because it worked. It was cheap. Well, Mother Nature wins, right? Who was it said last night? Mother Nature does what last? Mother Nature bats last. I mean, that's like the best quote of the whole entire week. Mother Nature bats last. So here we are. We got weed problems. Well, we can't go into lima beans and spray anything because they're about 2 weeks from harvest. So, well, what do? Well, we go out there and pull them all. Well, that aggravates the harvesters, as a matter of fact, because they use a stripper head. And anything we pull and lay on the ground, it gets sucked up in that stripper head and it runs through the machine. So we're all going back to Ropewicking again. Do you know Delaware is the #1 producer of baby lima beans in the country? We beat California every once in a while. It's kind of back and forth, back and forth. So this is how we have to get creative. And so this slide was to demonstrate that we are growing no-till lima beans into cover crop. And we have a weed control problem, and we're fixing it. Sometimes you just got to think about it a little bit. Sometimes we go back full circle. Right? That old man I was showing you a picture of in the first couple slides, right? He grew up, he used to always say he grew up headed northbound, looking at the southbound end of a mule. Right? And in that picture, he was riding in a tractor that was steering itself. It was 350 horsepower, planting 16 rows at a time, being driven by satellites. I mean, just to imagine what that generation was able to experience. And here we are going back full circle, because that Ropewick was bought in the 70s, and we're bringing it back into practice. Thank God Jim Baxter never threw anything away. There it is. How's a Ropewick work? Some of you are probably wondering how that works. So those white tubes are filled with glyphosate. We have a special blend of glyphosate and a spreader sticker. We like to use Schaefer's product. I'm not by any means trying to promote anything, but it works really well. Wet sol and just a very little bit of water. And we make a concoction, and it goes in the upper tube, and it flows through those ropes into the lower tube. So it saturates those ropes. And when you drive across that weed, it wipes its head, and just that little bit of, I keep on picking on you, I'm sorry, it's that green shirt, I think. So as you drive across it, it wipes just enough glyphosate across that weed that it kills it. So in a week's time, that thing is hanging down, and they ran the harvesters through there, and all they did was strip the leaves off because the plant was still senescing and was kind of staying fully attached. It really works well with Roundup resistant weeds also. We got to change our concoction. We've got to put paraquat in there. So you got to watch it. You got to watch it. But paraquat will smoke Palmer amaranth like that. Hammer dead. Hammer dead. Now, that does bring up some questions that I've got for Rick on his weed control and how well he's done. And this is the stuff that I'm talking about. I'm so glad I came, because I had no idea that it was possible. And I think it could take all day, he and I having a conversation up here in front of you guys, and you might get bored with it. But the fact that the man doesn't have to worry about weeds and is growing the stuff that he's growing is pretty awesome. But we've parked our cultivators, right? That's what everyone else around home's doing. They're cultivating lima beans 3-4 times in a row. Well, I don't have the help for it. I don't have the patience for it. I grew up cultivating corn. We still got them, but we've parked them, and we're changing how we're doing things. Harry Vetch planted in the fall or very, very early spring in front of lima beans will provide enough nitrogen that all I have to do is put on a little bit. I put on about 12 gallons 2x2 of a nitrogen sulfur blend. And that's all I need to grow that crop. I'm not having to get a spreader truck out there. I'm not having to come back and side dress it. And we're talking 3,000 pounds to the acre lima beans. So here's that lima bean viner I was telling you about. See the dead weed right there? And they're just stripping everything off. And this is so crucial, seeing this machinery, because that piece of machinery weighs about 60,000 pounds going across that ground. All right, if we pause right there, it'll do it on its own, I think. The reason I'm standing in the field, that right there is Palmer amaranth. There's about 1 million seeds right there. So I'm standing there, I'm actually hand pulling. He made that pass. Jake and I were out there hand pulling those weeds, carrying them over to where he's already harvested, because that's what it's like to be a good steward. Because that's a custom hire company, right? They work for the cannery. So they bring 6 machines on my farm and they pick 200 acres of lima beans in 2 days, load them onto a truck, and they go into the processing plant. Those machines then therefore travel, 10 miles up the road, 30 miles up the road, 6 miles up the road, whatever. They go to my neighbor. Well, just like I don't want the guy before bringing me Palmer seed, I don't want to send Palmer seed to him, right? That's how we're good stewards. But back to the 60,000-pound lima bean viner. The year was 2018. We talked about how wet it was, right? It was wet everywhere. Every 3 days it rained. I had gotten special permission from the cannery because I was hell-bent for this no-till and cover crop thing. It was working. It was working in my corn. It was working in my sweet corn. I wanted to see it work in lima beans. So I told them, look, I'm done tilling ground. I want you guys to partner with me. Let's try this no-till with cover crops in it. We went and inspected a couple cornfields, and the guy goes, it might cause a little trouble for the machines when they're picking. He said, but hey, let's try it. Later on that fall, they pulled into the field of my neighbor, and they went 10 feet and stuck. Next machine pulled in next to him, went 3 feet less, and he's stuck. They had 7 machines stuck in one field at one time. Like, you got to pull them out with a wrecker, not a tractor, a wrecker. I mean, the kind of stuff that breaks machinery. Everywhere they went, stuck. They pulled out of there and they came to ours. They didn't make a rut. At that point in time, we were 5 years no-till and cover crop combined. Didn't make a rut. Did we have soil compaction? I am sure. And that's another question for Rick that I need to find out more about how we combat it. Now, we actually went out there with some NRCS guys and gals and used a big bean can, like a coffee can, stuck it in the ground and did a water filtration rate thing. So we knew we had a compaction problem. The point being, the machinery got across the ground. Now, and this is where you have to make a judgment call, right? Because my profit relies on them picking those beans. If I say to them, well, the ground's not ready yet, well, you know what, I'm stuck. 0 profit, 0 income for the year, so negative profit. So that's the kind of conditions that we're in when it comes to vegetables. We don't get to say when go time is. But we have learned to combat that go time with soil health. That I'm able to hold up a 60,000-pound machine in extremely wet weather just by building my soil integrity. Same thing, 12-row corn head on a combine. Guys, I'm picking corn through water this deep, not making a rut. Now, why in the world are you picking corn through water this deep when you know you ought to just let it sit there? Well, guess what, guys? You don't have to worry about hurricanes, right? Y'all ever watch the forecast and they talk about hurricanes? Well, it could go here, it could go there, it could go there. And you know what? It's got a target on us because we're right there, right? We just had Elsa hit us. Luckily, she didn't want to build a snowman. She just brought us a little bit of rain. But that's why we have to do what we do when we push for when we have to push, because the weather is not our friend in Delaware. Fast forward to that winter, and I went and met with the owner of the processor. He called me. He said, I need you to come speak with me. Uh-oh, done something wrong. I went and sat down. He goes, hey, so whatever you did last year, he said, do it again. He said, you were the only farmer that we harvested on out of probably 12,000 acres. You're the only farm that we harvested on that had 0 blemish on your beans. So not only did I not have problems harvesting, but we had all 100% A-grade beans because we found out those bean pods were not laying on bare dirt. they were laying on cover. They were laying on residue, and allowed them to not get these blemishes on the beans, which would allow them to be rejected, and you get paid less. You get a dockage fee, just like you guys are used to with corn and soybeans and wheat. All right, so we're planting everything with this planter, except maybe some soybeans, because you saw my son planting soybeans with another planter. But that planter goes across 2,000 acres every year at least. Corn, sweet corn, soybeans, lima beans. And I don't change anything on it, except maybe a couple down pressure settings. But we designed this planter to plant in cover crop because we have gotten ourselves to where we're mellowing out so much when we've gone away from tillage and just strict no-till, and now we've added cover crop into it. And so I've not gone as far as Rick has, but we're using no-till coulters, but a shark's tooth row cleaner. Now, again, I'm not here to promote anybody, but I know a Yetter shark's tooth row cleaner is the only one in our area that works. I've had guys try other kinds because I say use a shark's tooth row cleaner, and they call me and cuss me and want to fight because I've screwed up their day because they're trying to plant green into cover crop and it doesn't work. So we have to figure out what's going on. So that's why I very specifically say a Yetter shark's tooth row cleaner. It'll cut through anything that we run the planter across. Now, I've not gotten to the point where I've gone away from the row cleaners yet. Now, I had to, and that's later on in the slides. We've narrowed up our gauge wheels, which was kind of a cool conversation to have with Lauren. I said, Lauren, I've been debating whether to narrow up my gauge wheels to go away from the, the regular OEM gauge wheels to get narrowed up, to get inside of that furrow of the row cleaner, because what we were finding was we had so much residue, we'd make that furrow cut to get bare soil in that little spot so we get our corn out of the ground faster, our beans out of the ground faster, whatever it may be. But we weren't able to regulate the depth correctly because sometimes that gauge wheel would ride up on top of that residue that we're now moving out of the way. And so it would alter our depth. And so we were able to put a narrow gauge wheel on, as you can see it. And the funny thing is, that was like right after I met Lauren, and I called him one time and said, hey, what do you think? He said, I've been doing it for years. Oh, okay, never mind, I'll move on. So then we follow behind with our 2x2, which is here, and then I run an in furrow. It's a little thing I made, and that's an incomplete. But I couldn't ever get the in furrow injectors to work that were always on the seed firmer or something like that, totally tubulars, whatever they may be. They're constantly plugging up. And twice a day I'd have to get out there with a little pin flag and poke at them trying to get them to work again. And so it's not very uniform, right? It's all about everything being uniform. This is the most important piece of machinery you're going across your ground with. Something Rick pointed out that I really need to emphasize. Just because your neighbors are going or just because you can go doesn't mean you should go. And I learned that. I got a Steiger tractor pulling a 16-row planter. I could pull it through anything. But just because I can doesn't mean I should. And I learned that lesson the hard way. Again, because we're no-till and cover crop so long, I can get across just about any piece of ground anytime. It was a Saturday morning, I woke up and it was a chance of rain. Well, let me go start planting. Well, it started raining as I was planting, and I kept planting. I planted all day long in the rain. Then it proceeded to rain some more, and rain some more, and it got cold. The corn came up about that big, and it turned purple like you see it. And then it kind of sat there and it turned yellow. So I called my guy, Tack. I said, hey, Tack, I said, something's going on with this corn. You want to come out here and walk around with me? Well, that's when I learned a very valuable lesson. Don't ever go out in the field without a shovel in your hand, right? Never go out in the field without a shovel in your hand. So we went out there, and within the first 45 seconds, he told me, he said, I'm pretty sure I know what your problem is. But we went out there, take the shovel down, pop up that row of corn, lay it out across the ground. When you lay it out across the ground, it kind of like shales out. I had created a compaction layer by dragging that planter across the field. And what it did, that corn seed went in the ground about 2 inches deep, right? 2 inches deep. And it germinated and it came up and then it started spreading out roots and it went like this instead of going like this. And it wasn't happy. Now luckily it got hot and sunny and the ground dried out and the corn went head on through. But lesson learned, just because I can doesn't mean I should, right? All my neighbors were planting corn. I started late because I always do. Well, today's my day to catch up because I'm an awesome no-till farmer. So I can catch up to all these guys. I can plant 150 acres of corn today, and they can't. I'm going to show them, well, what did I lose? I don't know. Did I lose 10 bushel? Did I lose 5 bushel? Did I lose 25 bushel? But we know that the corn wasn't happy because I could. So fast forward a couple years, and this is day 1 of planting corn into hairy vetch cover crop. Guys, hairy vetch is my thing. But I know we're in a lot different climate than you guys are. First off, we don't have the temperature extremes you guys do because we're surrounded by water. And the ocean never freezes. The Delaware Bay is frozen once in my life where you could walk on it, and that was a couple years ago. But because we have no temperature extremes, we can plant cover crops at a lot different times than you can, and we can plant a lot of different species of cover crops. I think hairy vetch has a place here. I really do. I love legumes. I absolutely love legumes. Like I'll grow soybeans behind a legume. Because at 80 bushels, we're learning that soybeans need nitrogen, right? So if you want to get above 80 bushel soybeans, you got to have some kind of nitrogen source out there for them. That's a worm. I mean, we almost went out there and started digging up worms to go fishing. Like, that's what they say. One of the first things is worms. Well, that's a worm. And that's in my hand. That's how big that worm is. That's just roots and stuff that I thought were really cool because the way I've got my planter set up, when it closes up that trench and then follows it with that fertilizer coulter, it kind of makes a little notch about that wide where you can just go along and pull that right up. And that's what it is. That's all that roots and everything else. And then with it is these chunks and nodules that we were finding. And so the conversation last night, Russell, I think, was how much, is Russell even here anymore? Did you go take a nap? Huh, well. All right, so the question was, how do you know how much credit you give yourself on nitrogen? And I kind of don't. I kind of just have done it enough that we know. But we credit ourselves every year. If I can get that vetch this tall, waist high, by the time I plant, I give myself 80 units of N for that crop. Again, we've already done the math on how much that saves right off the top. It doesn't matter how much that cover crop seed is, you're making money. Now the interesting part about that hairy vetch and that nodule in particular and the biomass above the ground, it takes about a month in our climate for it to start to break down. So if we plant corn in the middle of May, towards the end of May, about a month later, that corn is what? V5? V4? When does that corn plant decide that what kind of crop it's going to create due to the environment that it's in? So if it's releasing that in at V5, plus the chicken manure we've put on it, plus what we've put on it with the planter, that's a happy crop. Would you guys think we could grow 300 bushel corn in Delaware? We can. We can. Because we're nothing but sand, and we're nothing but good water. The only thing we're missing is the nutrients. And that's what we're providing with these cover crops. And we're holding on to it now because of the no-till and the cover crops. We're not allowing it to go to the ditch, to go downstream. See what I mean? That's hairy vetch. And everybody's, well, how in the world can you plant through it? You just plant through it. I don't know. You just do it. The only thing that gives us trouble is corn stalks. If we did not mow our corn stalks last year, it can cause problems because that vetch will vine up around the corn stalks, and then the stuff wants to wrap up on everything. But typically speaking, with those row cleaners, the way that they spin at a higher RPM in which my ground speed travel is, I'm able to pass right across that ground, no problem. What we've noticed over time is that we've mellowed our ground out so much, we've had to change our press wheels. When we first designed that planter, we just put rubber on it because it was working. For the first 3 years, rubber was working. I first noticed it in sweet corn because we only plant it an inch deep, that we weren't closing up that trench properly. You walk along behind the planter, every once in a while you see a seed, and uh-oh, that's not good. So we put more down pressure on, that wasn't doing it. We changed the angle in which the planter's sitting, that wasn't doing it. And so we have started experimenting with different type of closing wheels, and we found some we've liked, but we have different issues with them as well. So again, as time progresses, we've had to adapt. That was rye. So we don't wait for a certain particular stage of rye. I mean, that rye right there in that picture, you see the tractor, you can't tell it very well for the screen, but it was yellow because the rye was pollinating when we were planting corn. As you can see here, a nice dark strip where that planter went through. Now what we'll do is we'll come back right behind the planter. We destroy with chemical purposes. We're not equipped to come back and roll or crimp, but after learning what I've learned, I kind of like Rick's baby. That's pretty neat. And the concept that he's talking about is pretty cool. So again, these are different stages of operations, right? I mean, he's talking about, only go part way. Well, I'm only part way. But the sky's the limit on things like roller crimping. Imagine if I go across with a roller crimper running, I don't know, 8, 12 mile an hour, how fast can you go? 7. So if I'm saving time, I'm driving across the field the same width almost and the same speed as a sprayer. Probably using the same amount of fuel, but I don't have any chemistry to have to buy, and I'm still accomplishing the same exact thing. You pay for a piece of equipment real quick. So it's hard to see in this picture, but this is another cool one. This is spring of 2021. These rows right here are planted crisscross from the rows planted here. These rows are an imaginary end row to tell me, the planter operator, to change population. So I go from planting 30,000 up there to planting 18,000 here. Yeah, we plant our corn 18,000 dry land. And it might produce 75, 80 bushel an acre. The corn up there, it has a potential of 300. Now, if you can see it, that corn's out of the ground. This corn is not. It didn't rain the whole month of May in Delaware. It wasn't until Memorial Day weekend. It rained just about all weekend long. It was the best Memorial Day I've ever had. I think I slept the whole entire weekend. Finished up planting corn Friday night, and it started raining an hour later. But that corn did not come up until it got rained on. It sat in the ground dormant. Now, thank goodness it sat in the ground dormant that it didn't germinate and then die. I got lucky. But again, there was moisture there when I planted, but it quickly went away.
Are you seeing your organic matters increase by doing the cover crop, even though you're putting manure on?
Correct.
Which helps. But, I mean, I know it's sand, but.
So the question was, are we seeing our organic matters increase? And so that's a huge question. Dr. Haney here still, or does he go back to the camper? So that was a big question I brought up last night to some experts, because I'm not. So I've got these books. I told you, I've got these books goes all the way back to the 80s. And so just about all of it's owned land. So it's the same piece of ground that's been tested year in and year out. And we're not seeing any difference. Why? That's what I can't figure out, is why. And I had a couple people that know more than I do, and I respect them a lot, that said, why does it matter? Why does it matter? Because it comes down to bottom line. If I'm seeing my yield stay the same, and I'm seeing my inputs decrease, my bottom line's increasing. So who cares about organic matter, right? But it would be a cool thing to measure. But I'm understanding that the Haney test, which I think we'll learn about later on, will be a lot more to learn about my soil than just doing a probe stuck in the ground and send it to a lab. So, yeah, to answer your question, no. So, on that, what is our organic matter? I think my lowest is a 0.8. And my highest is just above a 5. No, it's not. But it's only in certain small spots of a farm. We have a lot of 2s. But we're seeing evidence of soil health, like you saw in the previous slides, of just all of that, all those roots constantly growing, and that mycorrhizal fungi. I mean, it is so prevalent that you can see it with the naked eye now, that you just grab a handful and it's there. But it's only in the upper 2 inches. And that's where we are so slow, is our heavier ground, our darker ground, our higher organic matter ground is gaining momentum faster than what our sandy ground is. Everybody always told me, well, you can't no-till this black ground that we call it, black ground that's in the swamp. You can't no-till that. Well, we started it, and we started putting cover crop on it, and it was actually more forgiving than the sandier grounds were. So that's what tells me you guys can do it. It'll work. Because if we can do it in beach sand and it's better in the heavier ground, well, I can't imagine what you guys can do with 18 feet of buffalo crap. Just like this picture right here. You see all of that stuff in that handful of soil. And it's all held together by roots and decaying plant material. There's a little, I think that's a soybean stem that decayed and just kind of left a nice little spot for moisture to get in, wormholes. That was me inspecting that corn that didn't come up. I was out there with a shovel and just pulled up kind of a clod. And it was extremely dry, so you can imagine, but if I were to wet it, just how nice and firm that would stay together, but yet get saturated with water. And my soil moisture holding capacity has got to increase with these little pores in it compared to what it was. So where was I? That's a good question I can ask myself in front of you guys. In 2001, when I came home from college, we were chisel plowing, we were spreading manure. We were chisel plowing, we were disking it twice, we were running a field cultivator on it, and then we were running a cultimulcher. You guys remember a cultimulcher? It's like a great big hunk of steel with crowfoot packers on the front and back and tines on it because we were incorporating our herbicides using a cultimulcher. An antiquated way to do business, but we did it. One piece of corn ground that's directly behind my house was the first farm that I finally convinced my uncle, look, let me just try it. Something's got to change. We were irrigated corn ground. We were about 110 bushels the acre. Every spring we had to run irrigation to keep the sand from blowing to the next county or blowing out to the ocean. Well, let's just try it. So we started no-tilling. We're also pumping wastewater from our local municipality. And so with that, we have to have something growing all year long. So that's where cover crops came in. And that's where we started learning about flying them on with an airplane. Well, because we were just trying to go out there to receive government money for planting cover crop, we didn't really care what we put out there, right? We'd get bin run wheat that'd been through a heat. We didn't care whether it came up or not. We got $12 an acre, $15 an acre, $20 an acre, whatever it may be. Then I started to realize where it did start to work, where we did buy good crop to put out there, and it did get germinated. There was something to it. We were still going out there early spring, and we were burning it down, and we were working that ground up. And I started to ask the questions, well, what if? And I started asking around, and there were some guys that have been doing this for years and years. They were growing hairy vetch. You know, if I'm going to have to be forced by the state of Delaware, because I'm spraying wastewater, to put cover crop on, why not use a cover crop that could give me benefit? So that's when we started doing research for benefit. And we started realizing that the bigger the crop, the bigger the biomass, and by using a legume, which we found that hairy vetch is a great legume in our region, I can't get clover to do what it's supposed to do 2 out of 3 years. That's just me. Vetch is consistent year in and year out. I can guarantee myself 80 units of N. So now we fast forward. I don't care about the government payment anymore. And kind of to your question, that's kind of what you have to ask yourself. I don't mean to pick on you, right? But are you out there for the government payment? Are you out there for soil health? Right. So who cares if you go out there with a VT? If you think it works good for you, and a VT with a box on it is the same as a VT with a spreader on it, but it's just semantics, don't worry about it. You're not doing it for credit.
But it's also carrying over into the carbon credit program, I'm finding out.
Okay.
So that's another.
All right. Well, all right. That's a whole nother ball of wax, and I'm not going to go there with carbon credits because I don't know nearly enough about it. I do know that I won't get any credit for carbon credits because I've been doing it for too long. So fast forward to this spring again. This is my experiment for 2021, something that's been on my mind for a very long time, and I think I'm wrapping up. So I hope I'm not boring you all too bad. This side right here is the same as this side, except a little bit different plant species, and we'll talk about it. We came in early April. It was about April 2nd, and we spread 2 tons of chicken manure across that piece of ground. We came in right behind it and just burned everything off real cheap and quick with paraquat and oil. Just took care of all the winter annuals that are out there growing, anything that was going to cause us problems because we wanted something fresh to start with. I came in 2 days later with a small spinner spreader and I spread on hairy vetch. As you can see, here's hairy vetch here. This was something I had left in the seed tender from last year. It was hairy vetch blended with radishes. This was about, like I said, this was about April the 6th, April the 7th is when I did that. This picture was taken the day I planted corn. Now, I purposefully did this. This is a piece of ground my wife and I own. Therefore, I can't have everybody at Baxter Farms Incorporated, which is technically it's owned by shareholders. That's a whole other story for another long, long time. But we did this on our own ground because I feel so passionate about this that I was willing to put my money where my mouth was on my own land. We planted corn into it. Intentionally was the second to last farm we planted on May the 25th. So to Rick's point, don't be afraid to plant late. Because I've got neighbors that plant in March. And then they got to replant in April. And sometimes they got to replant again in May. But by golly, they're the first one out. Why? I hate replanting corn. It's awful. What a waste of time. So, May 25th, planted corn. Obviously, you can see I got a lot better stand of crop here. And this is hairy vetch that I really wanted to pay attention to. At that time, it was from the base of the stem where it goes in the ground was about 8 inches, but it kind of runs out prostrate. So, therefore, it looks a lot smaller than what it is. Any guesses as to what the difference may be between this and this as we get further along? Weed control? Weed control is great. Yeah, but what's the difference in how that corn reacted to strictly a legume versus a legume and a scavenger? We kind of predicted it ahead of time, but we had the seed, and I was, well, we might as well experiment while we're experimenting. We'll get to that. It's kind of going to be the cliffhanger for the day. So then we go into the last field. And this is my absolute disaster for the year. Remember me telling you guys about that piece of ground that yielded 110 bushels the acre, which was my first experiment back in 2001? So we fast forward 20 years. This farm has now been perpetual no-till and cover crop for 20 years, consistently, persistently, every single year. About 2007 or 2008 is when we started planting green into it consistently, persistently, every single year. And I told you about the corn stalks that sometimes cause problems for the planter. So we go out there with a vertical tillage tool, which our flavor of choice is a Krause accelerator. I like it because I can adjust it in many different ways. So I made the mistake, as manager of Baxter Farms Incorporated, I made the mistake of thinking that I could give somebody the responsibility to just go. Typically that works out pretty well. But in this case it did not. And I can go into a lot of details, but it doesn't do any good. And it could sound derogatory. So I'm just going to give you some real quick snapshot of what happened. The previous farm that he ran that vertical tillage on, he said he couldn't see where he was going. So he took it upon himself to lower the depth. I didn't realize he did lower the depth as deep as he did, but he never brought the depth back up when he came to this farm. So we went from a clay-like soil to sandy sand on a hill. I pulled the planter in the field, unfolded. This is Friday. I've got 100 acres of corn left to plant. Man, I can get this thing knocked out in 3 hours. You know, so I went full with irrigations all morning and fiddle fart with, you know, my kids and whatever, and pulled in, and it was like, I don't know, 2 o'clock. I think I even picked my kids up at school that day. And I start making my inroads to get them all done, and I go across the field and I do this. I turn around and I look back, and I am dragging the entire field with me when I go. What in the world is going on? Again, it's just hairy vetch and some winter annuals. We had spread manure on it, but we wanted to go in and we wanted to flatten that stuff down so I could get across it with my planter. Another thing about hairy vetch, if you wait too long, as it starts to senesce, it turns to wire. So we found that if we can kind of run that vertical tillage, not even touching the ground, I mean where the blade is just touching the ground, not even making a slice, that it'll size that material and it'll roll. So once I saw this, you see my fertilizer coulter, which isn't even a fertilizer coulter anymore. It's kind of just something hanging there, because sometimes I hang a bar across it to act like a wiper to get across cover crop. You see how bad it was digging in the ground. I could not keep the planter out of the ground. I'm getting madder and madder. Then I go up to the shop where this thing's parked. See this right here? That's at its deepest setting. We typically run up here C and D. He's at like IJKH, LMNOP. So I grab the shovel, and this is when I text Lauren, and I start saying bad words I don't normally say. I text Lauren, and I go out there with a shovel. That's how deep I can dig in, just stick it right in the ground. I mean, he has fluffed that soil to oblivion. And it's not a very good picture on the screen, but you can look and you can see the soil profile right there, that beautiful, beautiful root mat. And all of that work of 20 years has just been annihilated and mixed in with that yellow that's down here. And again, that's only 6 inches. But literally, guys, that's how much topsoil we have, is about 3 inches on this farm. And then it turns to sand, yellow sand. And that's what we're constantly trying to build. All we have to work with is that 2 to 3 inch layer, and we're trying to build it and nurse it as much as we can. And we've just annihilated it, destroyed it. I'm pissed. Try everything. That's what the planter looks like driving across the field without it on the ground. The picture was taken at night. But you can see how bad it's sinking in the soil, because we've now taken such a living organism and lifted it set it down, whatever we did to it, but we fluffed it up so bad, I mean, I wanted to puke. What we ended up doing on this piece of ground was I ended up running a pivot on it. Now, again, you know, we are blessed with water. We're blessed with a lot of it and plenty of it, and I ran the irrigation around. I put on about a 1/4 inch that night, and I was scared to death that night because I wanted to get done. There was big rains coming. I wanted to get the corn planted, so I didn't sleep half the night worrying about this cornfield and worrying about that irrigation quitting out in the middle of the field, and I wouldn't be able to start until it did get all the way around. But it did. It got all the way around. I got back in the planter at 9 o'clock that morning, and I got that field planted. As I started traveling across and it started drying out, the problem started happening again. So soil moisture was my friend in this situation, and we're able to get it done. And we did it. It's not pretty. It's extremely ugly, but I refuse to walk out there in it right now. My hypothesis is we're going to have increased yield this year because we have now introduced all of that stuff back to the soil again, which is not what we wanted, because after year one, I would suspect that we're going to go backwards the other way. But again, it happens. We've got to move on, and we're going to learn something. So here's the first experiment I was telling you about. There's corn in this field, right here. That corn was about V3 at this point in time in this field. You could see a plant right there. See it? Another one's right there. I got scared. I got scared because the corn wasn't, the vetch was growing faster than the corn. So we came in and we sprayed it with our typical post-emergent. Usually we use a 2-pass program. We come in with a pre-emergent and a planned post. We have started to cut out our pre, and we've just strictly gone to our planned post. But in this case, we definitely came back with our planned post. That's what it looked like 3 days later. But we left 2 more checks in the field just because I couldn't let it be. I left 2 sprayer widths, so 90 feet in 2 different spots across the field. And come back about V8, V6 maybe, V6 I think it was, and we sprayed the 1 check and killed it. Except we had to change up chemistries a little bit, and it didn't kill it all the way, and we're left with this. I don't know that that's a bad thing. I haven't been home this week to pull tissue samples and tell you what it is, but we started pulling tissue samples across all of these different checks to know as to whether we're feeding that crop with the nodules or whether we're depleting the crop because there's a weed out there to it. This is what it looks like where we killed it early. This, again, was soon after we killed it, and you can see a little bit of slug damage moving forward. That's what the final check looks like. It's ugly. Maybe I can harvest some vetch out of it. I don't know. I can't get it all to mature at the same time. We got weeds in there. We've got a little bit of corn in there, and we actually came in and tried to side dress it, but I don't know that there's enough corn to even justify. But again, what did I lose? 2 acres for an experiment, right? How much do we waste in trying stuff? Don't be afraid to try something even crazier. You know, luckily for me, I planted end rows around the whole thing, so once the corn got big enough, the neighbors didn't know what I was doing anymore. But there's been an awful lot of talk around my area. People wondering what in the world I've done. And that's me side dressing. We don't need sound for this one. It's just a visual. You can see the difference in height, I thought. Yeah, it's right there. See the difference in height? So you guys don't have to worry about tourist traffic on 4th of July weekend trying to move equipment around. But that's a little bit of what we deal with on a pretty regular basis. So from Thursday night to Monday noontime, it's just you might as well stay off the main roads, which is a shame because the back roads aren't fit for big equipment anymore, which I think is what you guys deal with on a. And so here's one more, and I think this will wrap it up. But this is what I mean by in Sussex County, Delaware, we're never 10 days from a drought. This was this past Saturday as I was preparing to leave to come here, and that's what that phone call was. We're still working with the same pivot that wants to act like a turd. But you can see that corn's pretty burnt up. It had 2 1/4 inches of rain on it 7 days before that. You see this right here is a ditch. And we don't have enough holding capacity that the water runs off when we do get the rains, and it goes to the Chesapeake Bay. This ditch goes to the Chesapeake Bay. So that half had been watered already, and this half had not. And that part had been. So where the irrigation was sitting, it actually was parked where it hadn't irrigated any yet. But that's just a little bit of what we're working with. And you know, you see the scope of the farm. I mean, we're not farming small parcels, but it's not by any means what you guys have out here, which is just, I'm telling you, this is beautiful country. So I'm sorry Rick's not here to answer the question, but this is our newly invested weapon of mass destruction. This is what we were talking about. Cover crop air seeder. This is a new endeavor of my wife and I. We hope to do custom work and take a little bit of work away from the airplanes. This is something our local conservation district owned, and they wanted out of it because a government entity struggles to work with the farmer's hours and the way a farmer needs to operate. So we have taken it upon ourselves. This is going to be a private sector job for us, working with farmers, interseeding cover crop into standing cash crop. The first job for that machine is we're going to be working for ourselves, and we're actually going to try to put soybeans into sweet corn. The sweet corn will be harvested at the end of this month. Typically, if we get soybeans in by the 5th of August, they'll produce enough to make us money. And usually we plant them. But if we can get them out early and let the sweet corn pickers go, when they get all that fodder on the ground, cover those beans up, keep irrigation running, I'm thinking in theory we'll get some kind of cash crop out of that.